Welcome to LabMinutes.com. After the release of our first video on ACS 5.3 installation, we've been receiving a lot of requests asking for more ACS video, so what we have decided to do is to officially start a lab video series on Cisco ACS. And also thank you for those of you who have provided feedback through our website. So that made this video a second video in the series. You can find a complete list of ACS video on our website by clicking on the link above and sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. In this video, we will bring you up to speed with the web interface on Cisco ACS. The goal is to become very familiar and know how to navigate around the web interface, especially if you came from an ACS version 4 and earlier. And as you will see that ACS version 5.x has dramatically changed cosmetically, as well as in concept of configuration. Here's our lab setup. We have an ACS 5.4 and a VLAN 32 at the IP of .100. We also have a with Windows 2008 domain controller as well as DNS server installed at the IP of .40 of the same VLAN. We're first going to log into the command line interface on the ACS by SSH into the ACS server. So here we have a PuTTY session open. I'm going to log in. So the username is admin and the password is the password that you set during the installation. First command is show run, just to look around. You can see the syntax is very similar to the iOS, Cisco iOS. So from top to bottom, just to go through real quick, we have a domain name set up, the IP of the interface, the name server, and for us is now domain control 32.40, default gateway. Make sure you have a time zone and time synchronization with the NTP server set up. And then we can do, just to make sure we have a correct, since time is very important in ACS. So when we show NTP, you can see we have time synchronization right here with the district that signify that the time is synchronized. And if you show clock, you want to make sure that you have a correct time there as well. Next, we want to test is you're able to do DNS resolution. So you can do NS lookup just like how you do on your laptop or PC. And we're just going to look up our domain name, and you can see it's able to resolve. It's pointing to our domain controller. You can also do a ping. If you do ping question mark, you can see it supports both IPv4 and IPv6. If you can ping IPv4 and then LabMinutes.com, or actually just IP, and this will verify both DNS resolution as well as your reachability to the domain controller. You can see it's pingable. Okay, next we're going to log into our web interface, and again this is the fresh install of ACS, and this is after the license has been installed. So let's log in. The username is ACS admin, and then the password. And the first thing you will see or you dropped into is the My Workspace section, and here it provides you with various shortcuts to various pages on the ACS. Usually you can just skip through those. You can see task guide, there's some quick start, there's some tutorial configuration assistance. We're just going to go ahead and skip through all those and go ahead to the first configurable section, which is to change the password of your admin user, which is ACS admin. This is where you can update your password. Okay, the next thing that you can configure is the login banner. We're just going to go ahead and put in a simple login banner. We'll do LabMinutes, and there's two types, the before login and after login. So for the before, we do LabMinutes before login banner, and then for the after login, just copy and then say LabMinute after, just to kind of distinguish between the two. And here we have the after login banner, and then submit. Okay, the next section right below that is the network resources. This is where you add your network device. First, you see the network device group, and by default there are two device groups in there. One is location and one is device type. So that is for the group, and then right below here is where you add the actual network device, and we will come back and revisit this little section when we are ready to start adding network device. Next, we have a default network device section, and this is for the devices that's not explicitly added under the network device, and you need to specify or if you want to treat or how you want to treat those devices. You can see by default it's disabled. The parameter under here is pretty much almost configurable as what you'll be seeing under the network device itself. Next, we have the external proxy server, and this is when you want to turn ACS into like a radius proxy, when all it does is just relay radius messages to another proxy server. This is where you would add that proxy server destination. Next, we have OCSP services. So with the version ACS 5.4, OCSP server is supported, and that is for checking a certificate revocation with the OCSP server, and this is an alternative to using a CRL or certificate revocation list. So if you later on use the client certificate as part of your authentication, this is something you might want to look into. Okay, next we look at the users and identity store section. Start off with the identity groups, and this is the local user groups that you can create, which later on you can use as part of your authentication authorization policies. Next we have internal identity stores, and this is you create your local users and local host being the MAC address of the device. This is a non-user device. You can see right here, it's just like a whitelist kind of thing. Next we have an external identity store. So in addition to using local database, you can also leverage your existing LDAP, whether it's LDAP, Active Directory, or token servers as far as the user database. And we will look specifically at LDAP integration, Active Directory integration in our later videos. Okay, next we have a certificate authority. This is where you would download your trusted CA certificate. So it's just to let ACS know what CA should be trusted. And next we have a certificate authentication profile, and this is where you specify, usually when you deal with the certificate-based authentication, it's just basically what attributes on their certificate you want to utilize to look up the user for authorization purposes. Okay, next we have the identity store sequence. So what we can do is create a list of identity stores that you want to use as part of the authentication. So for example, you might want to, as part of authentication, to look up the Active Directory for a user first before you might want to fail over to the local database, for example. Next we have policy element, and under policy element, this is where you define the condition and results for your authentication and authorization policy. We're just not going to go into detail on this right now, since later on in the video, when we create the policies, we'll come back and revisit these in detail. Next we have access policy, and this is where you create authentication and authorization policies. Again, I'm just going to skip through this section since we have a separate video dedicated for policy creation. But what I would do for now, usually I would disable the default policies that come with the box, and then later on we'll just create our own. So right here, under the service selection rule, just go ahead and click on those and then delete. And then save changes, and as soon as you do that, you can see these two policies right here turn gray. That means it's disabled. Okay, next we have the maximum session for user setting. This is the global setting for users. So by default, it's unlimited session per user, so we're going to leave that alone. And if you want to get a little bit more granular as far as the maximum session per group, you can also do it right here as well. So right now, since we only have one user group, it's just all groups. Click on those, you can see by default, it's also unlimited session. Next, we have the monitoring and report, which if we launch or click on this link right here, we'll launch a separate page, and we will come back and go through that. For now, let's continue with our page right here with the system administration. First section, we have administrators. And here, this is where you can create additional administrator account. And for each account, you can specify what role you want the particular account to inherit. So for super admin, that means the person can access everything on the page, and then you can pick different role if you want to limit that person accessed as far as on the ACS. Okay, and here, these are the default roles that come with the ACS. And you can see here you can't really create additional role, but although you can go under each role and then just kind of see exact privilege that particular role provides. Now under settings and authentication, this is where you set your password complexity as well as some of the account lifetime or expiration for the administrator's account. So you can see by default all these boxes are unchecked, so all the complexity has been kept to a minimum. As well as under the advanced tab, seeing some of the things that you can configure here is password history, lifetime as far as the reminder to change password, or account inactivity if you want to disable account after certain inactivity period, or the number of failed attempt. You can see by default all of those are not checked. Next we have session. It's just the idle timeout as far as the web interface, how long it takes before the web interface that will lock you out after the idle period. Next we have access as far as restricting the user from coming in through certain IPs. If you want to lock that down by source IP, this is where you will specify that. By default, all IPs are allowed to connect to the ACS web interface. If you want to specify the IP, then you choose right here, allow only listed IP address, and then you start adding the source IP that you want to allow to connect. Next, we have administrative access control. Again, this is something new in ACS 5.4, where instead of traditionally you need to statically assign roles to each of the admin user account, but here with the administrative access control, you can create a rule-based authentication authorization policies and come up with a more elaborate conditions before assigning a role, or now it's instead of static, it's considered dynamic roles. So back here, if you go back to the account, and then let's say we create a new admin account, you need to make sure that under row assignment, you choose that as dynamic, and as you do that, the row assignment will be determined based on, you can see right here, the static role that options at the bottom is disappear. And we choose dynamic, it's just going to rely on the policy they create under here to assign role to your administrators. Next here is for the user settings, very similar to the password complexity and account expiration that we saw before for the administrator, but this time is for regular local users. You can see the settings or options are very similar as far as the password complexity. As well as on the advanced tab, you can specify password history, lifetime, and whether or not you want to enable TACAC enable password. Next, we have a max user session global settings, and here we have radius session key and TACAC session key assignment. Usually we don't really have to make any changes on this page. I'm just going to go and skip ahead. For per user session, right now we currently have no user session, so that's why it's come up with no session. Next, we have operations, and operations this usually deals with replication or config replication and backup. First, under the distributed system management. This is the page where you go to manage, for example, if you have a secondary servers for redundancy, as well as performing a on-demand server backup. And here where you manage the replication as well. But right now we only have a single server, that's why we don't see all the options. You can here, if you click, you can initiate a manual backup. We have a separate video looking specifically at the secondary server and how you would build a redundant pair of ACS. Okay, next we have a software repositories, and this is usually just a directory location. If you click create, you have a different protocols or FTP, SFTP, TFTP, or NFS. This is where you want a file to be located, for example, for a purpose of software patch or upgrades, as well as this also acts as a repository when you do a backup where you want your backup files to be stored. Next, we have a schedule backup, and this is where you can create your schedule backup for your configuration data, and you just refer it back to the repository that you have created in the previous option. Next, we have local operations and deployment operations, and this is for registering a secondary ACS to the primary. So this is where you will specify your primary instance or IPs and then username and password, and then you can register the primary. Okay, next we have configuration and global system option, and these are some of the protocol configuration that you can do. For ACS settings, you can change things like a username password prompt or the change password prompts, as well as some of the timeout values and session timeout. Okay, we have here also EAP-TLS. Actually, before we continue, let's go back and do a quick change. Let's say if you want to update a username prompt to LM username, and later on when we start configuring TACACs, and you will see how this prompt shows up on when you're trying to log into the device. So let's go ahead and change that right now with LM username and LM password, and then submit. Okay, next we have the EAP-TLS settings. And here are some of the parameters that you can configure for EAP-TLS, such as session resume, session timeout. Same thing goes with PEEP settings with the session resume and timeout. And also we have some configuration that you can do for EAP-FAST as well. And if you have to deal with RSA token server, here's where you can customize some of the prompt messages for the user as they're trying to log in with the RSA token. Okay, next we have dictionary with protocol, and here's some of the radius attributes that's available on ACS, and as well as some of the VSA, which is the vendor specific attributes, such as for the reference for the most part, and you can actually create or customize the radius attribute as well. Same goes with TACACs, although you can't really add it, so this is just for the most part for your reference. Identity attribute is where you can create a custom attributes for your internal user and host. And we will have again a separate video that will show you how you can leverage this option. Next, we have a local server certificate, and this is where you would install a certificate. And by default, the server comes with the self-signed certificate install that's used for client authentication as well as the management interface. So if you want to create and install a certificate that is signed by your trusted root CA, this is where you would do it. When you create a CSRR certificate signing request, it will show up right here with the outstanding signing request. Next, we're dealing with a log configuration. So this is where your syslog or log messages will go. So first we have a log collector, and by default it's pointing to itself, which is 32.100 IPs. And also you can create additional log target. So here we have a local log target with the retention period that you can specify how long you want to keep the log messages for. Next we have a logging category, and this is where you control what kind of logging you want to see. So for example, if you click under AAA audit here, it will first log into a local log target. For the remote log target, if you have an additional syslog server created, it will show up right here under the available target. You can just move it over to the selected target. But if there are certain log messages you do not want to see, then you can go ahead and disable it by removing it under the selected targets. Okay, this is showing you the instance of the log server. Under the log collector, if you, for example, have a secondary ACS, usually you can split the role by having the primary ACS doing authentication, and then you can have all the logging performed by the secondary ACS. So right here, if you have a secondary ACS added, you will be able to assign it right here. By default, since we only have one server, it's selected to be a log collector server. Okay, licensing is where you install the licensing, and then the download. ACS provides you with a couple of download applications. First is for migration utility. So if you were to migrate from a 4.x, but you have to make sure it's one of these supported version of 4.1 or 4.2 before you can migrate that to 5.x, and then this is where you would download the migration utility to perform database migration. And the rest of it deals with user change password, simple Python script, and REST service, which we're not going to look into. So that's pretty much it for the main page, and now we're going to go to the page that we launched from under the monitoring and reports. So right here we have that page open already, and the first thing that you see is a dashboard, and this is pretty much customizable, where you can add and remove the page that contains certain information. So when you click on the dashboard, you will see exactly what you need to see. So right here there's a drop down for the configure, and you can see you can add new page, or you can add an application, or you can even modify the layout or manage the page. Okay, alarm this is where your inbox, or where you receive all the alarms or alerts that the ACS generates. So you want to make sure to keep an eye on that, and there's any critical alarms on your system. So under the report, you can create, under the favorites, is to create some of these report under catalogs and add them to your list of favorites. So you would go to the favorite, you only see the report that you commonly or frequently use. And these reports, you will heavily use it as part of your troubleshooting. For example, AAA protocol right here, where you will monitor whether it is a success or fail authentication authorization, both for Radius and TACX, and I'll let you go through some of these reports that might interest you. Under troubleshooting, you can perform some basic troubleshooting here, but at the same time, it's also available over the command line with SSH. So things like a ping or trace route and NS lookup. Under the ACS support bundle, if you ever have to open a TAC case, the TAC engineer might request you to grab an ACS support bundle and upload it for them to analyze. And then we also have some expert troubleshooter that digs into a little bit more detail for the very specific problems relating to, for example, like Radius authentication troubleshooting. Okay, now next under the monitoring configuration and data management, this is where you will be able to perform backup for logging and reportings. Here we have a data purging as far as how long you want to keep their data around for in your store or repository. So if you have the repository defined the previous page, you'll be able to select them on the drop down right here. You can do a manual purge also, as well as you can do a manual backup of your report, and this is for on-demand backup, and then you can also schedule where there's a full backup or incremental backup as well for your report. When it comes time, if you need to restore your report, this is where you would do it. The server will look at the repository you specify, and if you have any backup that you have done in the past, it will show up right here and you can choose to restore it. The rest of these options are the ones that probably least commonly used, but some of the ones you might interest you is things like Snmp Settings if you want to have your Snmp server to pull ACS server, or things like email settings if you want to send out the alarms to certain email address. Okay, so that's it for the overall of the web interface on the Cisco ACS server. In the next video, we're going to look into some of these sections in more details. But for now, we should be somewhat familiar with the web interface, and we are now ready to begin our configuration on the ACS server. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video.